Hey there, it's Julie. I hope you've been getting some well-earned rest and relaxation this holiday season. Because let's face it, this time of year can bring its fair share of uncomfy moments. Those unexpected conversations about politics at a party, say, or some tough feedback from a family member you haven't seen in a while. Or maybe just those moments of reflection that make you realize you kind of need to shift course on something. Well, as you know, here on Uncomfy, our guests share how they have successfully handled moments just like that. So we thought it might be nice to package up some of that advice and share it with you here as a bonus while we're taking a couple of weeks off for the holidays. Let's get right to it. Our first piece of advice comes from Vanessa Otero. She's the creator of the Media Bias Chart, which you've probably seen online. And she's CEO of Adfontes Media. Now, one of the more dreaded things for a lot of us about the holidays is that chance encounter with someone who feels very differently about something, and they want to argue. Vanessa experienced that exact thing while she was waiting in line for her takeout order, and a stranger approached her with a comment about her t-shirt. She has some ideas for how to prepare so that encounter goes better.
When we can see that like all of our news sources say very similar things to each other, and there exists a universe of completely different news sources that say completely different things, it increases our understanding of the people in our lives and why our country is like it is. And how that usually manifests is somebody says something that they've heard from their particular news sources, and it's just shocking and jarring and offensive to somebody else who's never heard that before. And you think, how can my relative, how can my uncle, how can my niece, how can this person say such a horrid thing? But to them, it doesn't sound like a horrid thing. It sounds like a perfectly reasonable thing because they themselves have heard it a dozen times in the last week. So if you went and consumed some of the other news sources that you don't usually consume, and heard those points made, then they wouldn't be so shocking and upsetting to you the first time they fell out of the mouth of your relative. And then that preparation, that ability to expose yourself to the other side's media, can really help with these conversations. Because if you start out angry and upset and shocked that somebody would say something, it's a really different place to come from than when you are prepared. Maybe you've had time to think about that talking point, maybe come up with a rebuttal, or a question about it. It can really assist with these uncomfy conversations.
That was Vanessa Otero, CEO of Adfontes Media and creator of the Media Bias Chart, which, by the way, is a great resource to find some of those other news sources that are on a different end of the political spectrum from you. We'll link to her full episode of Uncomfy in the show notes. Okay, now let's talk mental health. I lost both of my parents in the last several years, so the holidays are really different for me. And I know they can be challenging for a lot of people for lots of different reasons. So earlier this year on Uncomfy, I spoke with Erik DaRosa about how he was finally able to open up to others about his own depression. Erik is a mental health advocate now, and he's host of the podcast From Survivor to Thriver. So here's some of his advice.
Find somebody who you trust. It can be a family member, a loved one, a spouse, a partner, a friend. It can be picking up the phone if you're in crisis and dialing 988. Make that conversation happen. It's going to feel, as you said, extremely uncomfortable. The very first time you utter those words, whatever those words may be, when you share with somebody that you're not doing okay. At the same time that it feels incredibly uncomfortable, it'll feel as though this tremendous weight has been lifted off of your shoulders. And from that day on, it gets a little bit easier. And the more you open up and you share and the more vulnerable you become, the easier it becomes to get uncomfortable and the stronger you become as a person. And by you sharing and being vulnerable, it allows so many other people to be vulnerable right back. And that's how we build this community, and that's how we shatter the stigma.
Erik DaRosa is a mental health advocate and host of the podcast From Survivor to Thriver. He's also got a new program that combines skiing and mental health. It's called UMost. You can check out his full episode of Uncomfy at the link in our show notes today. Now, for those of us in the United States, this new year is going to bring some big political changes. We've got a new presidential administration. We'll have new government policies. And maybe if you're like me, you're feeling an even stronger urge right now to narrow your circle to only people who see the world the way you do. Because the other side is just so wrong, right? Scary even. Well, there is another way. Here's what political pundit David French suggests. He's an opinion columnist for the New York Times.
I'm going to do the cheesiest thing possible, and I'm going to quote Ted Lasso. Be curious. There are a lot of Americans who've just finished making decisions that about half the country hates. So you have a situation where two Americans have received more than 70 million votes in a bitterly divided country. So it's just simply wrong to look at all of those people on the other side and say, well, they're just all misguided, bad, wrong, terrible, awful. I need to protect myself from them. Versus, wow, 71 million or 74 million fellow Americans made a really different decision from me. Why? And now, for some people, you will ask the question why, and the answer that you'll get will be ugly. You won't like it. That it is bad, that maybe they do actually hate me. Maybe they do actually think I'm a horrible person. Maybe they do have malicious intentions in some way. But an awful lot of the people, when you ask that question, you're going to get an answer back that humanizes them, that helps you understand where they're coming from, that destroys your own stereotypes and preconceptions. A lot of times we're just wrong about our political opponents. We think that they're one thing and they're another thing entirely. So one of my foremost pieces of advice going forward, be curious. When you encounter somebody who has a diametrically opposed views from you, be curious as the default. That's the first priority beyond setting them straight. Because everyone walks into those situations and they say, well, I just ran into someone who disagrees with me. I need to set them straight. Start with the priority of curiosity. Then you can have the argument after your curiosity.
That's David French. He's a columnist for the New York Times. And when he came on Uncomfy not too long ago, he talked about changing his mind on a big, hot button issue and then publicly admitting it in his columns, how he'd been wrong and explaining why he changed his mind. That was really interesting. You'll want to check that out in our show notes. Now, finally, are you a resolution setter? I admit I love the concept of a New Year's resolution, but I'm pretty terrible at the execution. Sometimes I aim too high, I think, and I just get discouraged too fast. But often the problem is that anything I could do just seems so insignificant. There's so much that needs fixing and doing in the world, even just in my own community. And I'm over here trying to learn a new hobby, as if that's going to make any difference in the world. So this last piece of advice is for me, and I hope you find it useful too. It comes from Harwood. He's a conflict mediator, and I spoke with him about a really big challenge he took on years ago, helping the community of Newtown, Connecticut bridge their differences and find a way forward after the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting.
I think that so many people have retreated from public life. They're afraid, they're fearful, they're lonely, they're anxious. We're separating and segregating from one another. Our news media and politicians manufacture and stoke division for their own gain. And I happen to believe that the way forward in our country is not to amp up more divisive politics. It's to find a new civic path forward. And I think that civic path begins in our local communities. People coming together and figuring out what we can agree on amid our real differences, how we can build together, how we can restore our sense of belief and faith in one another. So it's going to have to start in local communities. That's where all change in America, sustainable, big change has begun. But here's the thing, Julie, it's always started small. It's always started small. So we have 4 quick mantras that we use in our work. Turn outward toward one another. Get in motion, because good things only happen when we're in motion, not when we're planning and sitting still. Start small to go big, and create a new trajectory of hope.
A new trajectory of hope. That is my wish for 2025. Big thanks to Rich Harwood and to all the other guests who gifted us with their wisdom and personal stories on Uncomfy this year. I've so enjoyed it. And thank you for choosing to get a little uncomfy with us too, as we've learned how to do this together, how to stick with moments that challenge us and get all the benefits that can come with it. If you have an uncomfy story to share, I would love to hear it. Our email address is uncomfy@byu.edu, or you can connect with us on social media. And we'll be back with new episodes of Uncomfy every Wednesday starting January 8th. In the meantime, you can go back and check out any episodes you might have missed. There's lots to binge. Uncomfy is a BYU radio podcast. Samuel Benson produces it, and the team includes Enrique Prado, James Hoops, and Sam Payne. Kelsey Nate composed our theme music. I'm Julie Rose. Can't wait to get uncomfy with you again real soon. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.